culture of diversity, equality, and inclusion. Our value in the world is immense, and this commitment that we make as NASA helps us to succeed as an agency for the benefit of all humanity all over the world. The theme of this year's agency event is Power of Active Allyship, and that means working together to fight injustice and to promote equity in the workplace. Thank you for tuning into this important event where members of this community and our allies will discuss the issues and opportunities we face as a united NASA family. I encourage each of our family to reflect on ways that we can support our LGBTQ plus colleagues and friends. It's the NASA family that continues to make this agency one of the best places to work. And our success as a team relies on our diversity and our continual support and respect for one another. Thank you.
Welcome to today's LGBTQ Pride Month panel discussion. Thank you for joining us on NASA TV. I want to thank our leaders of our LGBTQ employee resource groups from across the agency who came together to organize this session today for you. I also want to thank our administrator for a wonderful introduction to kick things off today. We really appreciate that. And thank you to our panel members. We'll have a chance in just a moment to go around and make some introductions. Let me tell you that the theme of today's event is the power of active allyship. And I think that's a great topic for Pride Month. Pride Month is a couple of different things kind of that go together. It is a celebration of who we are as a community. It's also an acknowledgement of some of the struggles over the years in the quest for equality. And it's also an acknowledgement of some of the challenges that still remain. That's where allyship becomes very important, both within and to the community, because there are things that we can all do to work together to achieve those goals of equity and inclusion that we're all interested in. So let's introduce ourselves this afternoon so we can kick off the discussion. I will start. I'm the moderator for today. My name is Charles Cockrell. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am currently the Associate Center Director for Strategy at NASA Glenn Research Center, even though my permanent home, if you will, is at NASA Langley, where I've spent most of my career, and I am one of the executive sponsors of our LGBTQ employee resource group there at Langley. And I'm very proud to play that role because I also identify as part of the LGBTQ community. So again, thank you. And now let's go around and introduce our panel. I will ask Melanie to start this afternoon.
My name is Melanie Saunders. I'm the Deputy Associate Administrator for the agency, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I've been an ally for a number of years. I spent most of my career at the Johnson Space Center, and in my last few years at JSC, I was the chair of the Inclusion and Innovation Council, which was JSC's DEI panel and council. I was also previously executive sponsor for the first LGBTQ ERG, formal ERG. We had an informal group before that called the Out and Allied Group. And so I'm an ally, and I'm happy to be somebody who is visibly an ally so that I can maybe, by being a role model, other leaders will step out and be allies also in the agency. So thanks for sharing some time with me. Thanks.
Thank you, Melanie. I'd like to ask Sarah to go next.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sarah Phillips. I am an employee at Glenn Research Center. My pronouns are as varied as the rainbow. I typically go by she, her, but I also go by they, them, and I will certainly answer to whatever anyone chooses to call me. I am part of the LGBTQ community, and I identify as gender nonconforming and also lesbian.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for joining us today. Donna, I'll let you go next.
I'm Donna Schaefer. I work at Johnson Space Center. I'm associate director there, where I chair the I&I Council, and I also have had probably one of my most fun jobs ever in serving as executive sponsor for our Out and Allied ERG here at JSC. My pronouns are she and her, and much like Sarah, I answer to many names, and I'm happy to. And so I'm thrilled to get to spend some time here with you guys today as we talk more about what's going on with the world and how we can work together to make it a better place to be for our colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you, Donna. And Ron.
Yes, my name is Ron Braid. I am happy to be rejoining my NASA family members, having retired as of last October. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And one of my last positions at NASA was as the Ames Associate Center Director. I have also served as a senior champion for a number of ERGs during my time at NASA, including the Equal Accessibility Advisory Committee, which is for the people with disabilities community, the Native American Advisory Committee, both at Goddard, and then most recently in 2019, I served as the senior champion for the Pride Alliance at NASA headquarters for the LGBTQ plus community. So I'm honored to have been asked and glad to be joining you all today.
All right, thanks so much. And thank you to this great mix of community members, allies, employees, leaders, and people from across the agency to have this discussion today with us. We really appreciate it. One of the things that we'll try to do today, because we know that sometimes language is tricky, it can change, it can be elusive, so we'll try to define some terms. And so maybe that just makes it easier to have a good dialogue, and hopefully that's informative to everybody. So let's just start with that. All of those letters that are out there, LGBTQ+, what do they mean? So it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. And we could spend a lot of time talking about that term, but we'll maybe save that for another day. And the plus is on the end of there. You sometimes will see variations of that, but it just acknowledges there is a tremendous diversity in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity. And so we'll maybe have a chance to talk about what some of those things mean today. So first topic I'd like to maybe just chat with our panel about. I hope that the audience noted that when we introduced ourselves, we all identified our pronouns. And so pronouns are really important when it comes to gender identity. We've got a lot of studies that show that people, young adults today, identify as transgender or non-binary or gender non-conforming. And here again, we'll just define a term for you. If you ever hear the term cisgender, that just means someone who has a gender identity that corresponds to what they were assigned at birth. If you're transgender, it's a person who has changed their gender identity, or maybe someone is gender non-conforming, or non-binary might be a different identity, not different than male or female, so different than our understanding traditionally of what that means. So pronouns are a way of expressing that. And why is that important to do in introductions in the workplace? I'd like to maybe just get some perspectives from our panel. And Sarah, I'm wondering if you could start with that.
Sure. Thanks for kicking that off. So gender is a really interesting topic. And I think the most important thing to point out is that gender for a lot of people is a journey. It doesn't always necessarily have an ending. I think traditionally when people think of gender, they think you're either cisgender or you're transgender. You know, a lot of people don't realize that there's anything in between. For many people that are on the journey of being transgender, there's the idea that they're going to become as feminine or masculine as possible. And that's the more traditional view of how people look at transgender. Trans spectrum is absolutely huge. And it allows for people to really explore who they are inside, how they identify outside. As a non-gender confirming person, I identify as non-binary. So for me, I did not come out until I was an adult. I was already in my 30s because my entire life, I knew I wasn't a girl, but I didn't think I was a boy either. And it wasn't until someone actually started giving me some of these definitions and saying, you don't have to be, you know, as manly as you want. Like, why don't you just explore who you want, you know, who you are, and finding that medium and having the ability to day by day represent how I'm feeling, whether it be more masculine or more feminine, or maybe a variety of both, has allowed me to feel like the most authentic self I've ever been. And the way that we see gender and recognize gender is changing. And that's absolutely a wonderful thing. I know it can be scary to a lot of people because I think as humans, we like to have easy labels. We like to be able to identify something because then we understand it. And having gender fluid and non-gender conforming is not something that you can easily understand because there's no box. And so I think it's really good that we talk about that today, especially when we talk about allyship, because, you know, it's important for our allies to understand and respect that, you know, gender is a journey, and that there are a lot of employees at NASA who are, I think, going to listen to this today and really take a lot of positive feedback and feel good about hearing that they are supported on that journey.
Thank you, Sarah. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. From a NASA leadership perspective, let me ask either Melanie or Donna if you have a perspective on that and what NASA leadership might do in terms of the importance of pronouns and gender identity in the workplace.
So one of the things that I think is important to remember is that this is relatively, I would say, this is a relatively new concept to many people, especially many straight people. In the past, you know, the definitions have evolved even since I was an executive sponsor of Out and Allied. And so I guess what I would tell you is I'm always a little uncomfortable for the reason, not because I'm uncomfortable with the concept or anybody. I'm uncomfortable that I don't want to unwittingly offend somebody. And so I worry about whether I've got the protocol right, or whether I'm going to treat somebody the way they want to be treated, the way they should be treated, the way they expect to be treated. And so what I try and tell other leaders, if asked, is, hey, just treat every person as an individual. They'll give you cues about how they want to be seen and who they are and how they want to be addressed, and just pay attention and take everybody, you know, one person at a time. But the thing that I think is scary for especially a lot of straight people, is they don't want to offend somebody, and they're not sure if they are or if they're not, and what the kind of the rules of the road are. Because I think a lot of times people are uncomfortable, and that can be misconstrued as having a more nefarious origin, and it's really just afraid to be rude to somebody and fear of offending somebody. So.
One thing I would add on to that, just something simple that I only recently did, because it only occurred to me recently to do this, that is helpful, I think, as I added my pronouns to my signature block on my auto signature. So when my emails go out and people see that, they see what I hope is, one, me sharing a little bit of information about myself, and two, they see this as a space where if they're talking to me, I hope and you know, that they know they can be their true, authentic selves to me.
And Don, I really appreciate that. And to add on to what Melanie said, you know, sometimes it's those small things that can really make a big difference. So normalizing that practice of adding your pronouns to your email signature line, or even just getting in the practice of, in a meeting where you are introducing people for the first time, of stating your pronouns. It just makes everybody more comfortable in being able to share that, and then that way you're able to acknowledge someone the way that they want to be acknowledged. So it's a small thing, but it's a really important practice. So thank you for doing that. Ron, anything to add on this topic?
I agree with what everyone has said. I think that it's critically important as a leader within an organization to try to create an environment where everyone feels that they can be themselves.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate that. And that is actually a great segue to explore this topic of allyship a little further. That is the topic of today's event. So let's talk a little bit more about what that means to us. And so I would like to go around and maybe ask you, some of you already started to talk about that a little bit, but maybe expand a little bit on the different forms of support that allyship can take. And maybe if you have an experience that you could share with us, either positive or negative, that motivated you to become an active supporter within your NASA Center's LGBTQ group or beyond that in the community. So, Ron, let me go back and just start with you and see if you want to expand on those thoughts a little bit more.
Sure. Well, it's one thing to be supportive of an environment, but as a leader, how are we advocating for an environment that is much more inclusive? And so through my own experiences, life experiences, as an African-American male, I realized that sometimes being quiet and observant isn't enough to be an advocate for change when our systems really need kind of a fresh perspective to kind of take a step back and look at how we can modify our systems to be more inclusive of others as well.
Thanks, Ron. Really, really appreciate that, and really appreciate the theme of the intersectionality between different communities working with each other in common issues and concerns. So really appreciate that theme. Donna, you talked about being very active in your role as executive sponsor at JSC. Maybe have you expand on what motivated you to do that a little bit?
It was one of those things where, each of our employee resources groups gets 2 executive sponsors. I happen to have, one of the coolest ones, the Out and Allieds first, just because it was really great group of people. And of course, not long after I entered my role there, we had a massacre in Florida, and that group gathered together, and just to watch the humanity, the other ERGs that showed up, that stood by and were there for each other, it reminds us all that we're all people, that we're all working together for one agency that has a common mission, but we're a bunch of individual employees who also have things going on in our lives. And that, that event impacted me significantly, just watching the raw emotion in the room. What can we do? We all at NASA want to go in and we want to help. And this is an opportunity for us to step in and do that, even within our own team, setting the example for the rest of the federal government about how we behave, how we treat each other. This is not something that we can easily change quickly. If we had a magic wand, I'm sure we would, but it's slow changes, and it's about us stepping up and being there for each other. And, just the idea of making sure that the workforce knows we want them to show up as their authentic selves, because once that can happen, our missions get better.
Thanks, Donna. Appreciate that. Sarah, let me ask you, as a member of the LGBTQ community, what does allyship mean to you?
Allyship is huge. And one of the things that I would put out there as both a positive and negative experience to me, my center director, I have a little bit of a hero complex, hero worship for my center director. Dr. Perez Davis has made it her mission to make sure that everyone knows that at Glenn, diversity is one of the most important things to her. When we have a lot of gatherings, virtual, and she's speaking, she always makes sure that she's speaking to everyone that is listening. And she always uses language that makes sure that there is an inclusivity to the entire employee group out there. I would say a negative, and it's not a huge negative, but it's something that I think sends a message, and maybe for people to think about. And maybe you are an ally and you don't know how to tell people, but silence is very loud. And I think that sometimes when there is opportunity to let people know that you care and that opportunity is missed by silence, it sometimes sends the opposite message. And that really makes me shrink a little inside, because the reality is it's not always safe to be your authentic self. And it's not always welcoming. And that makes you a little bit scared at work. And there's a lot of people that identify that way for many different reasons. I think just using little opportunities, you don't have to put a rainbow flag up, outside your house, and you don't have to scream and shout, I'm an ally, but just using simple language when you're discussing things with people.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for sharing that story. Some great themes in there. I will share with you just, from my perspective, it's been an education for me to make sure we understand that while we've achieved a lot in terms of equality over the years, not everybody has benefited equally. when you see some of the statistics about the violence directed towards trans women, particularly trans women of color across the country, it's very alarming. I'm personally very alarmed by some of what I'm hearing in society directed towards trans people, everything from excluding trans women from sports to denying trans youth access to gender affirming care. These are the kinds of things that may not occur to people, but it's sort of all out there, and it kind of creates a climate that you can't help but have that influence what goes on inside our gates as well. So I'm seeking ways, even within the community, to do what I can to raise awareness and help with that kind of situation. So that's just another way that we can all serve as allies to each other, regardless of where we sit within or outside the community. So just, things like encouraging LGBTQ youth to STEM fields. How can we show ourselves as an agency to be more welcoming to highly qualified candidates? I think that's a really important conversation. And I'm going to maybe put Melanie on the spot a little bit here first as a senior leader. How does that relate back to our NASA value of inclusion and trying to make sure that we're attracting the most diverse workforce that we can?
Well, that's a great question. So this is one area where I really see a huge role for the ERGs, because I would hope that the ERG members are reaching out to affinity groups, LGBTQ plus groups at their alma mater, college or university. And that's where there's nothing quite as compelling in my mind as hearing a message from somebody who went to your college, who you would think was something like you and was aligned with a similar affinity group, and maybe, just having that personal pipeline of we're interested, and having them share personal testimonials. So I also think it's really important for the ERGs to be involved when we do recruiting, college campus recruiting, and put out our announcements, or that we're going to be posting, if it's all electronic right now, we're going to be posting these sorts of announcements and having sort of more personal touch. But that's something that HR can do only to a limited extent. It's far more compelling and powerful when we engage the ERGs. So one of the things I've had a lot of fun doing so far this year is I started a DEI steering committee at the agency level, because the administration's had a really great focus on a lot of DEI initiatives. And so we're trying to engage the ERGs in a much more direct way, with a direct voice, instead of just going through the center leadership. I don't want it filtered there. I want to make sure we hear the voice of the ERGs with the rest of the agency leadership teams.
Thanks, Melanie. Great perspective. Ron, let me ask you, as somebody who's been in the agency, now maybe outside, looking back in, you might have a fresh perspective to offer on that. Let me ask you to comment.
Well, I think that it is critically important to make sure that we're recruiting a diverse workforce. We know through data, through reports, through studies, that the more diverse your workforce is, the more innovative and creative your workforce will be. You have a culture of innovation and creativity. And so, having been in the HR space for a sizable part of my career, I also encourage us to consider the results of the employee feedback survey. They have demographic data there that can give you insights on how minorities view the world, how women view the culture, how the LGBTQ plus community views the culture. And so by analyzing that kind of data, it helps to make sure that the diverse group of people that we're hiring and recruiting, that we have a culture and a climate that is conducive for them to thrive and not just fight for survival.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron. Sarah, anything to add back on some of the themes you brought about earlier in terms of NASA being a welcoming place for LGBTQ people? Care to expand?
Yes. So I think of when you're applying for a job and you get to that interview stage, I always think of it as not only are they interviewing me to see if I'm the right candidate, I'm also interviewing the prospective employers, because I want to make sure it's also a right fit for me. That's how you're going to have the best relationship, and you're going to get the best employees who like where they are. And I have to say, I walked out of that first interview and thought, if I do not get this job, I don't know what I'm going to explode. I literally drove past NASA and just parked and oogle-eyed at, the big NASA meatball outside the hangar because I was just so starry-eyed. During my interview, there was only 4 or 5 questions. I don't remember the exact number. But of those questions, 2 of them pertain to diversity and what I felt about diversity and what diversity means to me in the workplace and why it's important. And I thought, oh my gosh, if they're asking me what I think about diversity, that means that they really care about it. And if that is so important that they're asking me more about how I feel about diversity than they are asking me about my technical expertise in the field that I'm applying for, I have to work for them. I was like, this is different than anything I was told. I was like, they care. Asking candidates what they feel about diversity is a great way to make sure that you are getting people that have that, that it is important to them, that it's as important to them as a new hire as it's important to you as an employee wanting to have the best workforce.
I was asked today to make a few quick comments about the value of allyship, and for that I reflect upon early days of participating in our LGBT program and organizations at Marshall. As part of my performance appraisal, I had mentioned participation in our group and support for the different events. And the first time I mentioned that, I didn't get a clear read on the excitement about that, so to speak. Turns out my assumption was wrong. My supervisor at the time showed up, sat right next to me at our event, thigh to thigh in a room where he could have sat anywhere he wanted. Listened to the events, asked questions about why I valued my participation, and made sure that that participation was continued and enthusiastic going forward, and really provided me an opportunity to continue being engaged. I think helped my colleagues by extension, and it's an attitude and culture that I hope I can help continue in my tenure at Marshall and within NASA. So thank you for your participation today, and happy Pride.
I want you to imagine that it's a gorgeous day and you're on a walk. You see your neighbor and they have a new puppy. You've got to walk over and say hello to this giant pawed, floppy-eared pup, and you ask your neighbor, what's his name? Her name is Tadpole. Oh, so sorry, she's adorable, you respond. You're embarrassed, right? You got the dog's gender wrong. The dog probably doesn't care. The owner might. You certainly do in that moment. And we've all been there, right? It's an easy mistake to make, but no big deal. Trust me when I say it's a much bigger deal when referring to a person. Having come out at work in the last year myself, I can tell you that it's painful when people misgender me. Though of course, people are going to mess up now and then. What's worse is when I'm misgendered in front of folks who don't know me, and now are associating me with the wrong pronouns going forward. That's where allies can really be helpful by doing their best to use an individual's preferred pronouns and, if appropriate, to take the burden off of us to correct others. Because if getting a dog's pronoun right matters that much, getting your friends and coworkers right means a lot more.
I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited to learn how to be a better ally to the LGBTQ plus community. As I look back over my life, I realized that there were a few pivotal events that made me want to become a better ally. One that strikes me the most is that my mom's best friend growing up, who was like my second mom, and she was actually there in the room when I was born, her eldest son was a gay man, and he died of AIDS. And his mother actually couldn't admit that. She told everyone that he died of pneumonia and never once spoke that he had or died of AIDS. And this struck me as really tragic, that someone's very own mother couldn't be open and honest with what had killed her son. And it makes me realize that we need to be vocal. We need to be supportive to the LGBTQ plus community. And we need to figure out ways to do it both at NASA and in our community at home. I've had friends that have suggested that if we wear rainbow pins or have a rainbow flag in our office, that could be a welcoming sign to LGBTQ plus people when they walk in and approach us. And so I've done that. And I also have a flag outside of my home that is a rainbow flag that says love always wins. So I look forward to the panel today and learning how to be a better ally. Thank you.
I was asked to give a quick story in honor of our LGBTQ community, and particularly when I was a reserve judge advocate at a large Marine unit in New Orleans after President Obama repealed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy in 2010. I was asked to go around the country and give a quick class about those things, and the military was very concerned that it would have an adverse effect on military discipline. And I took it upon myself to interview some of the younger Marines, and not one of them felt that it would have an adverse effect on good order and discipline. And that really made me proud and understand that we've come a long way in the military since I had come on active duty in 1985. And sure enough, when the repeal actually took place, it went off without a hitch. In fact, no incident whatsoever happened. The way we did this in the military was through allyship. And NASA, we do that very well, allyship. And we do that by recognizing people for their performance and their what they do for a living, and not because of their sexual orientation or their ethnicity or their race or any kind of label they might put on them. And that's as a leader, I think that's very important. And it's very important that we do that at NASA. And at NASA, again, I think that we do that very well.
For as long as I can remember, my parents have always had friends who were members of the LGBTQ community. In fact, I can vividly see my parents and Ms. Gert sitting at the kitchen table, laughing, talking, and drinking coffee. Years later, my mother would tell me that there were people who didn't like Ms. Gert because of her sexuality. And my mother said that was wrong. You accept people for who they are. And then there's my sister-in-law, who was a lesbian, who was able to live her life to the fullest because she had family who accepted and loved her for who she was. So I guess allyship is in my DNA. So as an ally, how can I make a difference for our LGBTQ plus employees? Advocate my support. For me, this means take immediate action if I hear or someone reports an inappropriate comment. After all, no one should be made to feel less than because of their sexuality, who they are, and who they love. In addition to advocating my support, participate, be visible in my support. So if asked, agree to be the executive champion for the LGBTQ plus employee research group. But more importantly, model my parents' behavior. Accept people for who they are. Be an advocate and champion for our LGBTQ plus employees.
So these are some really great themes in terms of allyship and welcoming people and conversations that we can have. Anytime we sort of talk about diversity and inclusion, sometimes we're going to get into maybe more difficult conversations that can be very constructive if we know how to navigate those, but they might be uncomfortable. So let's maybe pivot to some of those for just a minute to see if we can help people around those. And I will introduce another term for the audience. Sometimes we use the term heteronormative, and all that means is that most people in society are going to identify as cisgender and heterosexual. And so why that's important is when you come to realize that a lot of our norms in relationships and how we interact with people, going back to the pronoun conversation, are based on that understanding of being a cisgender heterosexual person. And the realization that LGBTQ people sometimes have to navigate some tricky situations in terms of assessing the cues and determining people's comfort level and how they're addressed and things like that. Then we can get into some more energetic conversations, things like restroom access, this tension between religious freedom and equality, big conversation in society right now. So how can we, what are some things that we could do to maybe equip people to navigate some of those really significant and challenging conversations, actions that people can take to help each other when we're trying to navigate those things? Let me start with Donna.
I will say that when we as a senior team began training together about diversity, white men as full diversity partners, that led to some vulnerable conversations. It led to that team becoming actually a far better connected team, a more trusting team, a team that could go to each other and talk with each other about things that were very sensitive topics, because we had learned to do that through this process of learning how to have difficult conversations with each other. I then become one of the executive sponsors for Out and Allied, and which was fantastic. And then, of course, little did I know then that all of this leads up to my child coming home her junior year in college to tell me that she identifies with the LGBTQ community, which I think that all of my work at work actually made her feel safe at home. And so you don't really ever know how this will impact you and what lives you will touch, because for her, she knew she was in a safe place talking to me. She knew she was in a welcome place talking to me, because she had seen me work towards people being treated as people, right? Regardless. That's how people all ought to be treated. And so for her, I think that was really brave, because that is not the welcoming that she received across our family. And that's really heartbreaking, probably more heartbreaking for me as her mother than for her, because she is a very strong young woman who is take me as I am. And I think this kind of circles back to what Sarah was saying when people are quiet, right? We can't be quiet. We have to speak up. We have to say it's not okay to say this or that or call people out. We have to stand up for each other as humans first. And when everybody feels safe as a human, they're going to give you their best. They're going to give the agency their best. We will see perspectives being brought into our teams that are going to make us so much better as a team. They can all of a sudden do so much more good for the agency than if they're masking part of who they are.
Thank you, Donna. Appreciate that. Ron, let me go to you next, as you alluded earlier to some other experiences and conversations. So what about these difficult conversations, your perspectives on how we equip people for those?
Well, I go back over the course of my growth as what I have characterized as me being a homophobe. I think about my upbringing as a kid. There is a friend of mine that I had known since elementary school. While I did not tease him, there were others that did tease him, and I didn't say anything about it. Or when I got to college at Virginia Tech and I stayed in an all-male dorm, we knew that there were a couple of gay guys who lived in the dorm together, and someone had posted a piece of paper on their dorm door that said it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And then once someone lit that afire in the dorm, and yet as a human being, I didn't say anything. And so what I've come to realize is that silence was more destructive than kind of piling on. And so, it has caused certainly a shift in my life and my orientation and how I view advocacy when I see wrong. Being silent, for me, at least on a personal level, is no longer an option. And then I came across this poem that's called First They Came by Martin Niemöller that I think was written back in the early 60s. And it says, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So, even to this day, reading that, it has a special meaning for me and the importance of advocacy, because silence is no longer an option when we see wrong.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate that. Sarah, I'm wondering if you could share any perspectives that you have on this topic.
Sure. Thanks, Ron. You just give me chills, and I'm trying to be unemotional. But yes, that poem, the first time I heard that is it's one I hold dear to my heart as well. Difficult conversations are just that, they're difficult. And I think it just comes down to mutual respect. If you want to question someone about some things and they give you a bit of pushback and hesitancy because maybe they're not there yet, they're not comfortable with those conversations yet, having to respect that they're not there is really, for me, pushing myself to those uncomfortable conversations because I don't want to walk through this life having to explain to other people why it is so hard for me sometimes just to go out the front door. I don't think I should have to do that, but because I care enough so that way someone else down the road doesn't have to have those conversations, I'm willing to. But it's kind of like, I think that there's also a certain responsibility for people to educate themselves too. So when they are asking questions, it comes from a place more of goodwill than maybe negativity. Before I came out as non-binary, I would get misgendered all the time, and I never corrected anyone. For some people that are on the trans spectrum, that's very triggering. And that can literally set them back and just crash them. So also understanding, though, that people are people, and if they didn't know your correct gender, it's also, you have to understand, this is a relationship that we are developing as a culture with each other. And so if someone corrects you politely on the correct term, it's okay to make mistakes, I think, as long as you recognize those. What's not okay is if someone has told you what they prefer to be identified as, and you blatantly keep misgendering or mislabeling them, because that's really going to harm that person on the inside, and it's going to make their life a lot more difficult.
Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate that. And this concept of misgendering and just, things like acknowledging when a person has access to the restroom facilities that correspond to their gender identity. Those are things that we really need people to do. And so making a mistake is one thing, and trying to retrain your brain a little bit on pronouns. When I know I have a friend with a trans child, and I'm trying to retrain my brain on that. That's one thing, versus intentionally disregarding that. That's another conversation entirely. So helping each other really understand the things that we could do is very important. I'm going to add a layer to this conversation and go to Melanie to help with this one. And it really goes directly to the first line supervisors. A lot of our studies show that first-line supervisors have a really big impact on workplace experiences. A lot of times your supervisor is maybe the first person that you would go to with one of these. Maybe you're having issues in the workplace. Maybe you're coming out and you need to talk to somebody and figure out how that's going to go. But a lot of times our employees and supervisors report that maybe people are just not equipped to have these conversations, and they're seeking ways to do that. So what are steps that the agency can take to really change that, to equip the right people to have those conversations? Melanie.
So one of the things that I loved that we did at Johnson was we required everybody to take an introduction to unconscious bias class, but then also we had a more race, power, and privilege that was a deeper class, and we required all supervisors to take that. So to me, one of the things that I think the agency should be doing is all supervisors should be required to take training like that, to know how to have those conversations, so that they're not just relying on whatever their personal mindset or perspective is. And I can tell you, JSC being in the Bible Belt, there are a certain number of people who probably would totally botch that conversation if they didn't have any training. Not everybody is open-minded, and not everybody is, some people would have a negative reaction, and how damaging that could be to the person who maybe is just, they're taking a year to get up their courage, or more to get up their courage to stick their toe in the water. So that training is really, really important, as well as making sure that we model the right behavior of the way the workforce should look, or the way the workplace should look, and the way model the right leadership behavior of how to interact with people. And and the right sort of attitudes to have to make sure that you're sending the right signals that it's okay, it's cool, you can be yourself, and that's totally wonderful. And we want you to be yourself.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I have another question here that I will admit up front that it makes me very uncomfortable to ask this because it's about the problem of the lack of LGBTQ representation in leadership at NASA. And the reason that is uncomfortable is somebody from my perspective, as somebody who came out relatively late in life when I was well into my career. I really had to navigate those situations. I was looking for the template, and it turns out there is no template because there really was no role models there. And this might be similar. I could probably ask that same question about other communities and the lack of representation, but it really did occur to me that we do have a lack of representation in leadership. It is very important, and so I'm trying to be mindful of that and figure out what I can do to make that experience maybe easier for others if they have to navigate that journey, because some of our surveys do show that there's still a large percentage of people in our workforce who are not out at work. There's something about the environment that is inhibiting to that. And so this representation in leadership may be important to that. So I just maybe like to hear any perspectives on that. Let me go to Donna first, maybe, and see if you have anything from your perspective.
It's not something that we can get a magic wand and fix overnight, right? And it's something about us being mindful, paying attention to it, looking for those opportunities. This year, as a result of the year-end report out last year, we've added middle management mentors, one additional mentor from middle management to each ERG. And so we're bringing people up and, having senior leaders as well as middle managers and support these groups. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we engage each other, the faster we will see those types of walls break down. And once those artificial barriers can come down, we'll see the rest of it change as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Ron, as a former HR director, anything you can add on this topic?
I know that for me, once upon a time, the African American Advisory Committee asked me to be their senior champion. And I said, no, I'm already an advocate. You don't need me to be your senior champion. Leverage this as an opportunity to inform and educate someone who may not be as familiar with the challenges that you face. Likewise, that was part of the reason why I served as a champion for the people with disability, the Equal Accessibility Advisory Committee, because I realized that there are issues that community faces that I am not aware of. The same with the LGBTQ plus community. When David Wilhelm asked me to be the senior champion, there's an opportunity for me to learn. And so I think that the agency should consider rotating senior champions through as a way of creating a different level of awareness at the highest levels of an organization, such that with that awareness, you can be a better advocate, you can be a better ally, you can be more effective in creating a healthy and more inclusive environment by having had that experience serving as a champion of an ERG that you may not necessarily identify with.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate that. Sarah, let me close this topic with you. What's important for you to see in the NASA leadership?
So representation is everything. I think a lot of people that I've encountered in my life, including family and that, they take for granted what's going on around them, going back to the term heteronormative. I remember the first time I saw a gay character on TV, I bawled. I just cried because I was like, oh my God, like it might have been the dumbest show ever. I can't even remember what show it was now. But I also know that's what I was very drawn to with Star Trek, is that even growing up, it was so diverse. Diversity has always been something that's been important to me, because I feel like the more colorful a room is, the more creativity is allowed to happen. And I think that even if someone is not able to identify themselves as the LGBTQ community, I want to add that it is LGBTQA. And we didn't mention that A today because there's a lot of letters after that, but that A is ally. And just to have someone say, I'm an ally, guess what? You are part of our community. And so even if you don't, represent as a gay person or a lesbian or as a trans person, if you represent as an ally, you are part of our community and all, you are representing. So I think that's why it's so important we're having this conversation today is because those senior leaders are the ones that are really going to pave the way for the future. And if people are willing to add that A to their identity publicly and not silently, that's where we're going to see some of the biggest change happen. And that's where people are going to feel more comfortable being who they are and being their most authentic self.
Thank you, Sarah. Really, really appreciate that. So let me just close with asking each panel member, what is maybe one or maybe two, if you would like, one or two things that you would suggest to people watching this broadcast that they could do if they wanted to walk away from this and be an active ally and be supportive of the community here within NASA? Let's start with Donna.
Well, I have to go with my kid here on this one. Talk about it, ask questions, be curious. And that's just curious about each other as humans.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Ron.
Challenge your own assumptions. Be open and receptive and reflect on, our own assumptions that we've kind of probably created and developed over years of unconsciousness. And so if NASA can say Pluto is not a planet, or maybe it is a planet, we should be willing to say as human beings, let's question our assumptions, because what we might have learned growing up through elementary school and through middle school and high school and college, maybe it's different than what we thought it was. And so let's question our assumptions.
Thanks, Ron. Melanie.
Well, let's see. I think there's a lot that allies can do to be more visible. So I need to get busy and change my email signature block to add my pronouns and say something about being an ally. I mean, just something as simple as that, and making sure that combined with my position in the agency shows visible support and a positive environment. So,
thank you. Thanks, Melanie. We appreciate that. And Sarah.
I really can't add to that. I was going to suggest what Melanie said is just the visibility piece. But, hearing today, we have three very powerful leaders on this panel who have said a lot of things. And really the most important thing is just being there for your employees and letting them know you're there in some capacity. And so I want to take a moment too and just thank you for letting me be a part of this panel and speak with you all today, because I think that this is just a wonderful thing. And I think it is going to help a lot of people hearing that we that we have a lot of leaders and that NASA does care about including everyone when they say for the benefit of all.
Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate that. I'm going to close by adding my two. They're going to be kind of repeats, but I think they're worth echoing. And there are a couple of what I think are straightforward things that anybody could do. Number one, put your pronouns in your email signature line. It is a very easy, simple, straightforward thing to do. You would be very surprised at the powerful signal it will send, because people will notice. Very easy to do, and you could do it today. Second, show up. Come to one of your ERG meetings. Unfortunately, many of our Pride celebrations are virtual again this year because of COVID, but there are some smaller celebrations popping up in different cities around the country. Some of them will be this month, some will be later in the year. Ask your ERG, show up, even if it's for 30 minutes, just to say hello, and I'm here and I'm interested in supporting the community. Those two things will go a long way to that. I loved it so much, I wrote it down about the silence. You can't go in silence. Silence is very loud, was the comment that Sarah made, and so I really appreciate you saying that. With that, I would really like to thank all of our panelists today. Melanie from NASA headquarters is our Deputy Associate Administrator. Donna from JSC is one of our senior executive leaders. Ron, and all your great perspectives in the agency. And Sarah, because you bring a unique and powerful perspective to this panel. Thank you so much for participating and spending the time and sharing your stories. And again, thank you to our ERG leaders around the agency who are doing the hard work on the ground of organizing these events, generating these conversations, getting the information out there. We really appreciate what you're doing, supported also by our Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity. And lastly, thank you to our NASA Office of Communications for the support in organizing this event and getting it out there for everybody to see on NASA TV. Thank you so much. And that closes our discussion today. Thank you.
I hope you found today's Pride event inspiring and feel motivated to become an ally in action. Anyone can be an ally, and I would argue everyone should be an ally, regardless of your sexual orientation, gender identity, race, religion, national origin. Doesn't matter. We need you to be an ally. And it's easy to say you'll be an ally, but I challenge you to act like an ally. And here are some tips that we share at KSC. Communicate. Communicate openly, regularly, and sincerely about your unwavering commitment to creating diversity and LGBT inclusion within the workforce. Promote. Promote a work environment based on equality and free from all forms of discrimination, harassment, retaliation, and inequality. Encourage. Encourage your coworkers to bring their full and authentic selves to work. Commit. Commit to creating real and measurable change through establishment of parity goals and evaluate our success using metrics. Finally, act. Act on LGBT recruitment and advancement to resolve the disparities that exist and encourage consideration of the equally qualified diverse candidate. So, communicate, promote, encourage, commit, and act. We all need allies in our life. For more information, please reach out to your center's Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity to learn how you can become an ally in action. You can take the first step this month by sharing Pride Month events with friends and coworkers. Thanks, and happy Pride Month.
At NASA, we're on a mission of equity, launching opportunity.
Equal opportunity to challenge and inspire.
To learn and thrive.
To reach those we've never reached before.
To use science, data, and technology to advance equity.
To shatter boundaries.
And break down barriers across America.
To create a better future.
We hope you'll join us on this mission.